The dogs are walking away. We're out on a dog walk in our park, and I want to make a series of videos that talks about how I'm structuring thoughts about art making in relationship to the things that I do. I think a lot of times artists have a tendency to spend so much of their time in the studio and wrapped up into the theory and research about making the work that they're making, that it's often easy to overlook the other things that you do in life and the experiences that you have and how they can relate to an artistic practice and how it can help structure your thoughts. So this video I want to talk a little bit about how dogs and owning a dog and raising a dog. This giant Schnauzer was the first dog that I raised as an adult. We raised, yes.
Death by dog. Oh, it's death by dog.
And yeah, I want to talk a little bit about ideas relating to artwork in relationship to dogs and the way dogs think and the way training a dog is important. So here we go. So Taya, standing there, is a working dog, and it's really important to do inhibition training with her to be able to get her to act properly when we're in public, etc. So these are a couple of Taya's favorite treats, her freeze-dried treats. So I'm gonna put those here. She wants those really bad, but she needs to work for it first. So that's the reward. Taya, Valisa. Uva Valisa, good girl. Good girl. Mister? Say so? Taya, spin. Sibula. Good girl. So this is what impulse control training looks like for a working dog giant Schnauzer. But what does that have to do with being an artist, a studio artist? Papa. All right, so I left off talking about the dogs. The couple takes that I had didn't work out, and I had to come to Italy. So I'm in Italy right now, and I have only so much time. I'm here for 3 weeks, and I have to get a bunch of work done for a show in that amount of time. And as you know, clay is a demanding medium when it comes to amount of time, and so I have to take advantage of all of it. So I'm going to do some recording while I work. We're going to have some studio talk sessions while I build up these pieces. And so anyway, I want to talk a little bit more about the dogs and thinking about how really impulse control. So I mentioned it as inhibition training, but usually when we're talking about dogs in the word inhibition, we're talking about bite inhibition, but I'm thinking of it more in terms of sort of impulse control. And then that, relates to how we're thinking about impulse control as an artist. And I mean, one of the biggest things is it's hard as an artist sometimes to get to the studio. Everybody, when they start making, often just really likes doing it, but if you don't have a sort of sense of need and urgency to make, it's going to be challenging because there's not really going to be anybody there to tell you you have to be at the studio once you leave school and you're not making work for assignments. To get there consistently. And similar with dog training, it's about small, it's not always about the duration of time you're there, but the consistency of doing the work. That's a huge part of dog training too. You don't need to spend hours training your dog, but you need to be consistent with the way you approach your behavior and your training. And sometimes, honestly, the small little moments, the small bits of time are more beneficial than the sort of long sessions, which have their benefits as well in the studio. But that's one of the big ones, is just making sure you get to the studio and be consistent, and consistently doing that. Put in the work. As nobody else is telling you to do that, you do not have a dog trainer. When it comes to studio, you have to be your own. What's another sort of impulse control? A lot of us are sort of, I guess we would say type B versus type A, often, not always, but I think in the art community that could be the case. And so there's that tendency to be excited about starting something and then having the impulse continue to just start another thing and not resolve and finish a piece of work. And so that impulse to just start something new sometimes has to be put off to be able to resolve the work in progress and focus on the thing that needs to be done. I'm also of the mind, however, that not everything in the studio needs to come to resolution. So it's, I guess, knowing when to resolve things and having the discipline to do that and not move on to something new, but also allowing yourself to set things aside, learn what you need to learn from them, and then move forward with new work. There's a balancing act between those sort of states, and that has a lot to do with sort of understanding and controlling your impulse and knowing, when to follow it and when to sort of fight through it. I think those are sort of the big ones, things that I thought about in relationship to impulse control as it relates to training my dogs. It's funny how we can find ways to think about things that relate to everyday experience. Art relates to so much of what it means to be a human is wrapped up into art. I'm back to painting squares, and I realized that my slip trailer's plugged. I probably shouldn't do that. I was working and I realized that there was another aspect of dog training that relates to making work and creating art, and that relates to the way a dog sort of exists in time. I mean, dogs are able to correlate things, their behavior and actions that you take, and they develop routine and can correlate one thing to the next. But they also exist very much in the moment. And this is, one aspect of training where you really recognize this is using clicker training. So I don't use a clicker, like the physical clicker. I just use a sound. I use yeah with my dog, and that sound then relates to the treat, and then the dog associates that with the behavior, and you have to deal with that timing in a very short amount of time because most dogs have a couple seconds, smarter dogs a little bit longer to build the association with the action, the sound, and the treat. And a lot of people fully sort of anthropomorphize their dogs, and obviously, as far as animals go, that you anthropomorphize dogs in a way make a lot of sense because they've been domesticated with humans for so long and developed their behaviors alongside of their connection with humanity. But they're still, their own entity, and they think in their own way. And you have to understand, to properly train your dog, you have to sort of get a little bit of an understanding of the way that they're thinking differently from yourself. And I think that making successful work is similar to that, is that idea of empathizing with your audience and making work that you're obviously interested in and excited about, but you're also able to connect to somehow your audience. And that time factor actually relates to the idea of the hook. Like, what is it about your work that captures your audience within just a few seconds? Like, what is hooking them into the rest of the conversation that your work is about? And I think about that in relationship to sort of empathizing as much as you can with an animal, sort of understanding that the dog's mental state is driven in a different way. And if you want the dog to behave in the manner that you want it to, you have to adjust yourself, not expect the dog to just fold over to the way that you think and behave. And I think that's similar to art. And that is the end of this little studio conversation. Back to painting squares. I think one of the next ones I talk about is actually going to be just crossing the street, crossing the road. But in relationship to crossing the road in Rome, like I stopped in Rome for a couple days before coming here, it just made me think about aspects of being an artist that relate to simply crossing the road. And I was like, who would have ever thought even crossing the road could be a subject that you could relate to art? But yeah, that might be the next thing I talk about. For now, I will wrap up this video and continue working on this piece and maybe start a time lapse for it. Okay, bye.